Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Market Update, where we discuss leading financial and economic developments in Asia, Europe, and North America. My name is Tony. It is a big episode today. We have a lot to go through. There may have to be an extra episode on the weekend as well. Let's jump in. First up, it's been a huge week for the US in the Middle East. We covered the first half of the US president's trip 2 days ago. We begin today's video by wrapping up the whirlwind tour. The channel is Market Update, so we will focus more on the economic and trade side of things. US President Donald Trump announced a record-breaking $96 billion deal between Boeing and Qatar Airways during his Middle East tour this week, capping a very busy week of economic diplomacy that has seen over $1 trillion in investment pledges across the Gulf. The aircraft order, said to be the largest in Boeing's history, comes alongside hundreds of billions in agreements covering defense, artificial intelligence, energy, and manufacturing. The Boeing deal will see Qatar Airways acquire up to 210 wide-body aircraft, including 130 Boeing 787 Dreamliners, 30 777X jets, and options for 50 additional aircraft, though no delivery timeline was disclosed. Boeing shares rose 1.5% in New York trading after the announcement. The Doha signing followed similar announcements earlier in Trump's Gulf trip, which began in Riyadh. There, the Saudi Crown Prince declared more than $300 billion in agreements had been signed, and Trump suggested the total value of planned partnerships could exceed $600 billion. The Qatari deals go beyond aviation. The White House revealed additional agreements in defense, energy, and technology. Trump's final stop in the Gulf was the United Arab Emirates, UAE, where the White House said $200 billion in deals were signed, including major initiatives in artificial intelligence and energy. Among the highlights included a $14.5 billion order for Qatar Airways for 28 Boeing aircraft, a $60 billion energy partnership, a $4 billion aluminium smelter project in Oklahoma led by Emirates Global Aluminium, and a collaboration council to bolster US critical mineral supplies. AI dominated the UAE leg of the visit. US tech companies, including Qualcomm, Amazon Web Services, and Nvidia, are anchoring a slate of new projects aimed at making the UAE a regional AI powerhouse. Plans include a Qualcomm-led global engineering hub in Abu Dhabi and a massive AI campus developed by G42, a flagship Emirati technology company with deep US ties. Trump's administration has also greenlit arrangements allowing Gulf nations to acquire tens of thousands of AI chips from Nvidia and AMD, though the deals have triggered internal debate. Some national security officials fear the Gulf's AI ambitions could pose security risks, especially if technologies are re-exported to, say, China, or used in sensitive applications. These investments build on the UAE's earlier pledge to channel $1.4 trillion into the US economy over the next decade, targeting AI semiconductors, energy, and infrastructure. Trump also promised a $100 billion AI infrastructure project spearheaded by Abu Dhabi-based MGX. Meanwhile, Trump made headlines by suggesting a deal with Iran may be within reach, sparking volatility in oil markets. Crude prices fell for a second day yesterday, Thursday, as Trump said the US and Iran were, quote, getting close, end quote, to an agreement on Tehran's nuclear program. Such a deal could ease sanctions and unlock up to 300,000 barrels per day of additional Iranian supply, analysts warn. Quote, the conversation is trending towards a deal that could be reached as soon as this year, end quote, said a Macquarie strategist. Oil markets reacted swiftly. Crude fell more than 2% to below $65 a barrel, reversing recent gains driven by OPEC Plus production constraints and post-detente optimism in global trade. The International Energy Agency further dampened sentiment, warning that global oil demand growth is slowing amid economic headwinds and geopolitical uncertainty. As Trump wrapped up his three-state Gulf tour, the cumulative value of deals announced exceeded $1 trillion. While critics remain skeptical about the actual delivery of some agreements, the scale of economic diplomacy underscores the administration's efforts to align strategic partnerships with tangible economic rewards. For Boeing, GM, and dozens of US firms, the Middle East visit may prove a major windfall. Next up, we now move to Asia. As Washington and Beijing enter a fragile 90-day trade truce this week, the spotlight has shifted to Southeast Asia, where countries like Vietnam and Indonesia find themselves increasingly entangled in global trade reset generally and the US-China trade war specifically. Chinese exports in the region surged more than 20% last month, offsetting steep declines in direct US-China trade and reinforcing accusations from Washington that Southeast Asia is being used as a backdoor for Chinese goods to bypass US tariffs. The practice, known as trans-shipment, involves rerouting goods through third countries and, in some cases, fraudulently relabeling them to evade tariffs. Quote, Southeast Asia is coming under more pressure than other regions because of origin washing, end quote, said Sharon Shi, coordinator of the ASEAN Study Center at Singapore's ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, adding, quote, the US thinks the Chinese will use the region as a backdoor to continue exporting to the US market. End quote. Speaking to my contacts here in China, I've been told that it is a no-brainer for many of these exporters to use these mechanisms like transshipping through third countries in Southeast Asia if they can get away with it. Trade officials from Southeast Asia are discussing the issue further at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation APEC meeting in South Korea this week. US Trade Representative Jamison Greer is expected to press regional counterparts to crack down on illegal re-export practices as a condition for tariff relief. Vietnam has emerged as the focal point of US concerns. Once a major beneficiary of production shifting away from China, the country now faces scrutiny for its growing trade surplus with the US and alleged complicity in trans-shipment. It was hit with 46% tariffs in early April before receiving a temporary 90-day reprieve. Quote, the top priority for the US side in these talks seems to be trans-shipment issues, end quote, said the executive director of the American Chamber of Commerce in Hanoi. Vietnam's Prime Minister has reportedly pledged to intensify enforcement efforts. Other countries, including Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia, have also promised to review transshipment practices and pledged to increase imports of American goods. April customs data from China showed exports to Southeast Asia jumped 21%, mirroring the drop in shipments to the US, with the sharpest increases in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand. An unnamed senior Southeast Asian official speaking to UK-based The Financial Times said the US had made it clear that no country could piggyback on bilateral tariff deals. Yet with China being the region's largest trade partner and investor, governments are treading carefully to avoid antagonizing Beijing as the US seeks to gut it from its new trade order. Our world has entered a period of tremendous change. We are very much living history, and if you want to be on top of the most up-to-date analysis on the biggest stories, the most dynamic regions in the world, Europe, Asia, and North America, consider subscribing to Market Update, and you will be. And if you're getting some value from today's episode of Market Update, don't forget to hit the like button. And finally for today, we move to Europe. Nearly a decade after the Brexit referendum, the United Kingdom and European Union are poised to reset their relationship. On Monday, leaders from both sides will gather in London for the first of what is expected to become an annual bilateral summit. The meeting reflects a growing recognition that, despite past tensions, Britain and the EU need each other more than ever in the face of mounting global threats to the continent. The inaugural summit will focus on forging a stronger strategic partnership to confront a range of shared challenges: stagnant economic growth, the ongoing war in Ukraine, and increasing uncertainty surrounding the United States' long-term commitment to European defense. 3 key agreements are expected from the summit. The first is a broad geopolitical preamble, a joint statement affirming shared values such as defense of Ukrainian sovereignty, commitment to multilateralism, and the principles of open trade and cooperation. This symbolic step aims to reset the tone of EU-UK relations and set the stage for deeper collaboration. The second agreement, viewed as the most urgent, is a Security and Defence Pact. This would allow Britain, long one of Europe's leading military powers, to participate in EU-backed defence initiatives and joint procurement efforts. Crucially, it would also allow EU countries to buy British military equipment as part of a €150 billion European initiative to bolster the continent's defence capabilities. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has already pledged to raise Britain's defence spending to 2.5% 2% of GDP by 2027 and 3% by the following Parliament. A formal EU-UK pact would mark a significant step towards building a more independent European security architecture at a time when reliance on Washington appears increasingly uncertain. The third item on the agenda is to enhance the UK-EU trade relationship. Though the UK recently signed a new economic agreement with the US, the EU remains its largest trading partner. Discussions will centre on revising elements of the post-Brexit Trade and Cooperation Agreement, TCA, which is due for joint review next year. Britain is expected to push for reduced border checks on agricultural goods and mutual recognition of professional qualifications to ease trade and services. The EU, meanwhile, is seeking greater access to UK waters for fishing and may propose a youth mobility scheme to restore easier travel and work opportunities for young people. The political risks are significant. Any hint of concessions to Brussels will likely be seized upon by Brexiteers as a betrayal. On the other side of the channel, EU leaders are wary of undermining the integrity of the single market or appearing to reward a country that chose to leave. Nevertheless, the economic incentives are compelling. Economists argue that closer UK-EU alignment, particularly on goods regulation, could deliver a meaningful boost to Britain's sluggish economy, something we've been following quite closely here on Market Update the last few months. A report by Frontier Economics suggests that, quote, dynamic alignment, end quote, with EU goods rules could add between 1 and 1.5% to UK GDP. ING economist James Smith estimates that such a deal could generate 10 to 15 billion euros in additional fiscal headroom for Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Critical breathing room as he tries to meet strict fiscal rules amid weak growth and rising costs. That potential windfall comes at a crucial time. The Office for Budget Responsibility is preparing to reassess productivity forecasts, and Reeves' already narrow £9.9 billion buffer for future spending is under renewed pressure from slowing global trade and domestic political uncertainty. Rejoining the European Emissions Trading Scheme and agreeing on harmonised food standards may serve as early wins, but the longer-term prize is a broader trade framework that restores some of the market access lost with Brexit, without crossing Labour's red lines on rejoining the single market or restoring free movement. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the EU is already revising its trade strategy with the US, hoping to accelerate negotiations despite unclear signals from the Trump administration. EU officials have floated expanded purchases of US goods and investments, but remain wary of Trump's tariff threats and his complaints about EU taxation rules. Should talks fail, Brussels is preparing countermeasures. This is an area we will be following in greater detail in the coming weeks as developments emerge. As the geopolitical and economic stakes rise, both Brussels and London appear increasingly aware that collaboration, not confrontation, is the best path forward. Monday's summit will not undo Brexit, but it could begin to replace the rancour of the past decade with pragmatic cooperation. The message is clear. The EU and the UK are stronger together, and now is the time for both to act boldly in their shared interests. Okay, that is today's episode of Market Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Friday, have a restful weekend, and there'll either be an extra episode over the weekend, otherwise I will see you all for a new week of updates on Monday.